Good evening and welcome to this 18-hour special. I'm Nayantara Rai. It's the mega 18-hour exclusive of the day. As Air India's privatization gather momentum, it looks like life's coming a full circle for the national carrier. We at 18-hour exclusively learn that the government and the Tata Group have held preliminary discussions on that mega stake sale. As we all know and has been announced by the finance minister, the Maharaja is going to be privatized. So we understand that in these preliminary informal back channel conversations, the Tata Group has been represented by N. Chandrasekaran himself, that the Tata Group is interested in buying as much as 51% stake in Air India. We also are being told by our sources that to maintain the Indianness of Air India and thus take care of all reservations and all concerns, the government may mandate 51% stake in Air India to be with Indian shareholding, and that's how the Tata Group could come on board. Now, in case the Finance Minister Arun Jaitley has his way with his cabinet colleagues, and something that's also been recommended by the Niti Aayog, and Air India is sold completely, we are being told by our sources that the Tata Group may just rope in its existing joint venture partner, Singapore Airlines, in such a scenario. In that case, Singapore Airlines could buy a 49% stake in case Air India is indeed fully privatized. We are being told that N. Chandrasekaran is in touch with the top politicians of this government as far as privatization of Air India goes. And obviously, that mammoth debt of 55 to 60,000 crore rupees will be a concern for the Tata Group. We've been telling you here on ET Now how the government is simultaneously, that is alongside privatization, working on bringing down that massive debt, whether it's to rejig dues or to oil marketing companies. It may reach out to banks for the same. Non-core asset sale is also not being ruled out. What's in it for Tata's besides, of course, buying back an airline they had founded? Well, its market share would go up by many notches. It's about 14% where Air India's market share stands in the country at the moment. Its fleet will also increase dramatically. We have seen the Tata Group enter aviation recently, but whether it's with Vistara or with Air Asia, it's not made the kind of dent Tata's normally like making in sectors that they enter. We did reach out to Tata Sons for a comment on this mega ET Now exclusive, and a Tata Sons spokesperson emailed ET Now saying, "We do not comment on such matters." So that's the mega ET Now exclusive. Let's take this forward with Jitendra Bhargav. He's an aviation expert. He's also an ex-big boss of Air India. Also joining us all the way from Malaysia on Skype is Amber Dubey. He's a partner and the head of aviation at KPMG. Good evening, gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining us here on this mega ET Now exclusive. Jitendra Bhargav, I'm going to come to you first. You're an old hat when it comes to Air India. You track aviation very, very closely. Do you see synergies here, besides the fact that the Tatas may want to buy back an airline that had been founded by JRD Tata in the 30s? Is there business sense if they were to indeed come on board of Air India?
See, the first thing is we must understand that Air India in its current avatar cannot survive or be revived. This is a given because as long as the government is controlling the airline, it will never be able to prosper. So there has to be a way found, and the best way is to privatize the airline. Now, if Tata's come in with experience in the aviation thing, a big conglomerate, and plus having been the original founders of the airline, I think it's a worthwhile proposition and a preferred proposition for Tata's to acquire it. A. B factor is that Tata's would know the assets, the real picture of Air India, because what Niti Aayog has unfortunately done is to have laid emphasis on the high debt and mounting losses, while being totally silent with respect to the assets. Air India Express, Alliance Air, ground handling that Air India performs at various airports in the country, 31 hangars, the big MRO at Nagpur, the ground handling engineering services, the plentiful of assets that Air India has. Now, once you the focus is removed from the debt and mounting losses, you look at the long-term stability. In my opinion, Tata's can provide that. They will see synergy. They are already running 2 airlines. The only question mark that I have is that since they have Air Asia and Vistara, can they have a third brand? The reality is that we are all supporters that Air India is the brand that must get preference over all other brands if Tatas have to hold it. So if that is the situation, how they deal with the problem is their thing. But I can quite understand their spokesperson not wishing to comment at this stage. But in reality is, it will help the Tatas because they get the large international traffic of Air India on a platter. It will give them a lead, as it is. Air India is the largest airline of India on the international sector. Because this was again one point, we have been journalists, and plus the Niti Aayog harped on it, 14% market share of Air India. Well, that's only in the domestic sector. In international is much more, and we shouldn't overlook the fact that 75% of Air India's aircraft capacity is deployed on the international sector. Now, Air India has assets. If Tata's come take over with Singapore Airlines, I think nothing could be better than this.
Okay, nothing could be better than this, but do you think the Tatas, just to have a more lucrative, may tell the government that they will want either the government to first absorb a part of the debt? Do you think that would be sound business strategy? Or to say that, we're not interested in paying for all the prime real estate that is held by Air India in, let's say, for example, South Bombay?
Now, real estate, etc. could be set aside. Let's look at the airline specific thing and then work out the economics and make the proposition acceptable, lucrative for anyone to take. Now, the other things, as I said earlier, Air India Express, Alliance Air, etc., could perhaps be merged later or being dealt with separately or be used to reduce the level of debt. But let's keep the focus on the airline, because if Air India prospers, Air India regains the past glory that it once commanded, everything will fall in place. And that is where I want to look at the big picture of Air India first. If Tatas can provide the professionalism, the productivity, because let's not forget, being a PSU unit, they suffer from a lot of negatives. The government norms on productivity, the government norms on recruitment, on promotion policies. So everywhere you look at, and plus Air India has plentiful of departments which other airlines with which Air India's performance compared do not have. Vigilance department, Rajbhasha department. You have a big materials management department because all the trending procedures have to be complied with, which is not accounted for. And plus Air India, of course, operates a lot of provides social services, Hajj flights, VVIP flights, evacuation flights, etc. Now, government does compensate it, but not to the extent the time, energy, money is spent on these factors. So once Air India is dealt with as a private entity, then its performance can be compared. And why I advocate privatization is, in its current avatar, with ministry meddling in Air India's affairs, Air India chairman going to the ministry to seek every approval for anything, including hiring of cabin crew or hiring of pilots, etc., is not something that an airline must operate. Recent examples of Japan Airlines and Qantas. What they did for turnaround was to have given these airlines a very strong leader at the helm. Air India has been in turnaround mode, unfortunately, for 20 years now. What have we got? A weak leader. Why do we have a weak leader? Because government wants to meddle in its affairs, and nothing better than a weak leader. So all these negatives will go away with one single decision: privatization.
Privatization is something the government has spoken about. The finance minister saying there are no two views within this government when it comes to privatization. Jitendra Bhargav, you also said you can't fathom a situation where there are going to be 3 aviation brands under the Tata Group. What do you think would be the most obvious one, that you have Vistara and Air India merging into one? Because I do understand from my sources that Singapore Airlines could also be involved in this privatization process along with the Tatas, if this is the route that the government also agrees upon.
You see, let's not forget, we are getting back to a scenario what was to exist in 1999-2000 when Tata Singapore Airlines were as a combined unit wishing to acquire, but the attempt was foiled by people who did not want a strong Air India to be performing. Now, in this situation, of course, Tata's board and Tata people will take the final call. But in my opinion, Vistara, with very limited market share at the moment, not having presence on the international airports, it will be easy for them to get into Air India with its brand name already knowing. And once you have the Tata tag attached to it of performance, productivity, good perception of image, etc., something that Air India currently suffers from. Now, all these negatives will go away, and you will really find, as I said earlier, Tata's can provide the necessary impetus that Air India needs for becoming a robust airline once again. But if they delay it further, Air India gets marginalized further. So in my opinion, the government needs to be determined. There have been half-hearted attempts for privatizing Air India or restructuring its management. And let's not forget, it was in 1988, 29 years ago, that Air India was first referred to the Disinvestment Commission of India. The problems listed in that proposal are just the same that exist for Air India. So government needs to fast track, ensure that this time it's not just rhetorical, it's action. And nobody, and fortunately, the Ministry of Civil Aviation, of course, at this stage, is not one which gets influenced by private airlines, something that we were witness to in earlier years.
You know, Mr. Bhargav, the only problem is, and do you really believe that the time is now? The reason I'm asking this is because there's no doubt that Air India is in a mess. The Modi government, since coming to power in 2014, is believed to have pumped in over 16,000 crore rupees. On the other side, you do have an Air India with a very big fleet. It's got the Dreamliners, you know, and it's got enviable international routes. So how big is the detriment, that 55,000 crore rupee debt? That's what I'm asking you. Is the timing now, or is it a situation where you wait for some time, pay down the debt, and then sell it so the government gets a better deal?
Well, let's look at it. Aviation industry is highly capital intensive. Air India inducted a whole lot of aircraft in the period 2007 to 2012. So naturally, there was huge element of depreciation on one count, loans taken to fund the airline on the other thing. So once you have these debt, and it will only taper down now, since the aircraft are now 5 to 7 to 8, 10 years old now. So once it goes down, and then of course you have less burden of it. You have not been able to repay or earn the necessary revenue that you could with deployment of these aircraft more productively is because of poor marketing that Air India has. Now there are certain negatives that are happening. Now of course, to make it lucrative for a customer, government may have to consider that what percentage of the debt on its balance sheet needs to be waived. Now let's also divide the debt into two parts, 52,000 crores, 20,000 as aircraft loans and 32,000 is working capital loans. Now aircraft loans is not an issue at all because the cost, the price, the value of assets, aircraft assets are much more than 20,000 of debt that they have on the aircraft count. It's the working capital loan that Air India has been forced to take because virtually 4,000 crore goes every year in servicing the debt that they took. Now, it's another matter that yes, CBI has filed FIRs and they'll probably look, but as they say earlier, as they say very often, polluter pays. Now, it was government decision that compelled Air India to take aircraft, get into this financial mess. So, who should be compensating? The government of India. Now, if Air India is not at fault, but Air India needs to survive for the good of the country, for the employees, etc. But let's look at it very clearly. Government is on right track. Government needs to expedite the process. Government does not need to get disheartened by protests from various vested interests. And unless that is done, Air India will only get marginalized further if it does not get done at this stage. So therefore, there has to be determination. And I'm sure we all agree that Modi government does have determination. Really if they take a call, they do pursue the matter, irrespective of the consequences or the protests.
That's much easier said than it could possibly be done. But Amber Dubey, I'm going to come to you. I hope we got you on a better Skype connection this time around from Malaysia. I know you don't like to get company specific, so don't get company specific. What I want to ask you is that as an aviation expert, how valuable or how lucrative is Air India for a conglomerate that has had aviation interests for many, many years, is trying to make a dent in aviation, hasn't done so with two existing brands so far? How lucrative or how valuable can Air India be for such an option?
Thanks, Nayantara, for having me, and apologies for the frequent breakage in the connection. I think Mr. Bhargav has very well articulated almost all aspects of the issues, the challenges, and the way forward. I would just echo what he just mentioned. The assets of Air India are generally not talked about. They're of great value. There is a fleet, and it's not easy to just get a fleet of aircraft from anywhere in the world in just one go. It has slots. You know what kind of situation we have in Mumbai and Delhi, and even in the global airports, say in Heathrow, JFK, of Singapore and Dubai. So the slots, the fleet, the people, most of the current Indian carriers have very, very senior professionals who've actually been poached from Air India. So that talent also lies there. And then there are, of course, physical assets. So if we add up all the assets, there is a lot of value. And I would not like to get into company specifics because at the end of the day, this asset will have to be bid out. Now, the government may decide to have one player coming in who might show or might have more reason or more synergies to leverage, and that party can, of course, do some kind of a Swiss challenge, make an offer, and if somebody else cannot better it, it gets it. But I doubt if it can be just given on a platter to one group. But whatever is happening, extremely happy the way things are going, and this government is showing that it has the political courage to take lots of large risks. And this is just not a risk actually, but a correction of a very old mistake. India should have never taken over Air India way back in 1953. Nayan?
Yeah, and Amber, maybe should have also exited earlier. Like, for example, we've seen British Airways being privatized long back. We've seen other European carriers get privatized long back. But my question to you also is that, are you then saying that whoever decides to buy Air India, I take your point that it has to be eventually bid out, but we do understand the government may make it necessary for 51% shareholding to be Indian. And I'm not sure if a SpiceJet or an Indigo or a Go Air can match the might of the Tatas. But having said that, are you saying the way Air India is now, with its debt, with the large aircraft fleet that it has, with its staff, etc., it's an attractive proposition? It doesn't need to be made lucrative first?
Yeah. No, there are two parts to the question. First of all, yes, does it have value? We've already discussed that earlier. It definitely has value. Otherwise, why would somebody be even talking to the government? Number one. Number two, now should we wait for till the entire balance sheet is cleaned up and all that? Well, Nayan, we've had these kind of discussions at least twice in the late 90s and the early 2000s. It was with the previous, the NDA regime, and it just got scuttled at the last minute. So I guess sometimes it is okay to take a suboptimal step and just get rid of the government ownership in an airline, which is a very commercial activity. Let the commercial activity be done by commercial people, and let government restrict itself to just regulation and monitoring, which itself is a job in itself. So I guess that has to be the future. One of the options that also comes up is the leasing option, that you can continue cleaning up the asset and liabilities on the balance sheet, but and keep the liabilities and assets on the books of the mother company, which is Air India. And you can lease these assets because these aircraft, the fleet, the people, all of those have value. They can be leased to an airline on a comparative bidding basis while you clean up the balance sheet. I mean, this is something very similar to what happened in case of the Delhi and Mumbai airport, where the assets and liabilities continue to be with Airports Authority, and the asset has been leased to GMR and GVK for a 60-year period. So something similar can also be looked at in the interim.
Amber Dubey, our line is again failing, but I take all of your points. Those are extremely good points. And Jitendra Bhargav, I'm going to give you the last question. As things stand now, yes, the DIPP says 100% FDI is permitted in aviation, but you know it, I know it. The final notification has not come in from the DGCA for over a year. They insist the control has to be Indian. Keeping that in mind, do you believe that besides the Tatas, there is anyone else in the business with the might in India that could rival Tatas for that stake in Air India?
You see, one, of course, is the emotional connect that Air Indians have with the Tatas is one thing, but let's keep that aside. But what the government of India can do, and we have a past experience, in the post-Satyam episode, what did the government of that period do? They set up a body of experts, put the company on track, and then sold it off. They could perhaps do the same thing with Air India, because it needs to be admitted and acknowledged that one individual as CMD cannot steer Air India out of the turbulent clouds. Something more drastic needs to be done. And the best way is to follow the Satyam example, get a team of 7-8 experts, put Air India on track. As Amber very rightly said, clean up the balance sheets, put the things in proper perspective, and then say, okay, come, whoever bids the best, takes the airline. After all, Air India, as I said earlier, has value, has strength. Its global presence, and I thank Amber for drawing the attention to the assets like the slots, the parking spaces at global airports. So Tata's or any bidder who gets the airline will get on a platter a large international network. And you don't need something better, because there's an opportunity cost. When you start an airline, you got to go through the whole rigmarole to get the things going. Here is an airline ready, and you can only improve it further, because the negatives of government ownership will, and you set it right, will give you rich dividends.
Gentlemen, I would also like to let you know that both of you sound far more bullish on Air India than a lot of the bureaucrats that we talked to in the aviation ministry who keep bringing us back to the bad.
If the whole process gets derailed little because of the bureaucrats, they don't want to cede control of the airline. So there will be a vested interest, and the Modi government must take care of that aspect. If the past process hasn't happened, there's been collusion. Of course, you can't prove it, but that's been a reality.
And to be fair, I think they are. They've been quite vociferous about it, that Air India will be privatized as soon as the finance minister has told ET Now on camera. There are no two views when it comes to privatization of Air India. Gentlemen, it's always a pleasure chatting with both of you. Thank you so much for joining us with your valuable insights. We got you two big aviation experts right here on ET Now, telling you this is the time to privatize Air India. They see a lot of synergies between the Tata Group as well as Air India. They're not getting bogged down by that bad debt, saying, it takes care of the opportunity cost, and there are a lot of ways the Tatas, who are experts at it, can clean up the balance sheet. Thank you so much for taking the time out.
Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/ETNow, and don't forget to click the like button. You can also follow us on Twitter at ETNowLive. To stay updated with all our programming, hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel by logging on to youtube.com/ETNow.